You have found the Lines Injury Podcast for NFL Week 4. My name is Steven Andress, joined by Will Carroll at Injury Expert on Twitter. More than 20 years of experience diagnosing, breaking down, analyzing NFL injuries and injuries all across the professional sports landscape. Will, how are you, my friend? I know that you were watching Thursday Night Football last night just like I was, and first and foremost, just grateful that Tua was okay and able to be discharged from the hospital.
Yeah, exactly. It was a very scary scene, but you know what? This looks like a pretty standard concussion. This isn't one of those things where we can say this was worse because he had that response, and we'll talk about that in a bit. It looked terrible. They treated it properly. You know, they immobilized him. They made sure there was no spinal involvement. They were saying there was movement afterwards. That really doesn't tell us anything other than, there was no spinal involvement, thank God. Yeah. The thing you have to remember with concussions is that severity is in no way in relation to what you see. This is an invisible injury. Until you get the MRI, the way we say, mild or severe isn't from the hit or the reaction. It's from how quickly you recover. And luckily, we've gotten much, much better at taking this seriously as a real injury. And then we've gotten better, I say, not great, but better at treating this. There's been some shift in the best practices from basically you put people in a dark room, and now you don't so much do that as make sure that they're kind of engaged a little bit. So we're seeing some shifts in that. What we don't know anything about is long-term consequences. And we've seen guys with obvious CTE. We've seen guys who you wouldn't think would have been, repetitive head injuries, and yet they do. We don't know the impact of those little, I say little, but it's all relative, hits. Linemen hit their heads on virtually every play. They're not concussed, but does that sort of rattling inside the head end up with damage down the line? And we've seen a lot of reaction from former players saying, I still have headaches. I still have symptoms. I worry about whether this is going to get me, whether I'm going to make it to my daughter's wedding, one player was saying. Chris Nowinski, who heads up the project up there in Boston, he couldn't have been stronger in how he dealt with this. So let's talk about two things. First off, what did we see last night? Okay, Tua got hit. Whether you think that was a dirty hit or not, I don't know, and I don't really care.
But it was that shot that they kept going to of his fingers, right? Where they were bent all weird. So that scared people. It confused people. So what is that? Yeah,
that's called a fencing response. And basically what happens is the brain and the spinal cord get short-circuited. And so what they do is protect the body by shooting out. It was designed basically so you don't fall on your face. What you saw with his fingers was just the electrical signals going nuts. When it gets hit that hard, when the spinal column gets a shock, you also see this sometimes with what we call a spinal concussion. If somebody gets hit hard enough, the spinal cord just shuts down for a little bit and kind of reboots, and you can see all sorts of crazy motions like the fencer's response. So that's a normal thing. We've seen that before. It's pretty common. You especially see it in boxing. Guys will get knocked out and they'll be laying straight up. They're out at that stage. So the fencer's response is just a natural protective impulse by the body, something that's evolved over years. So yes, it's scary looking. And those close-ups didn't help. But this, again, is a typical concussion. We're going to see this again. There are players that were concussed. There was 3 or 4 years ago, probably longer than that now, Andrew Luck was diagnosed with a concussion despite the fact that he played the entire game, came off and said, hey, I've got a little bit of a headache. And they tested him and he failed. And they're like, concussion. He was like, I don't know where I got hit. We look back at the tape. So sometimes nothing. Sometimes guys get just rocked, knocked out, and never have a symptom. What was unusual to me last night is, that they immediately went to the spinal. You have to treat for that. Spinal injuries are so serious, so life-threatening that you have to treat it that way first. About the only thing that gets priority over that is if somebody stops breathing. which has happened. Was a Lions linebacker, if I remember correctly. I can't recall the name. It's been too long. But it's one of those situations where it is very scary. But again, we know nothing about the severity yet. He's had the MRI. He's having another MRI today. He's had. They don't test him at the stadium. He goes straight into the concussion protocol. Now, this is a positive and a negative. The system's designed to be a little bit flexible. When somebody has an obvious concussion, they go straight into the protocol. But not having the testing, we're not going to be able to back that up. I'm curious if they did the testing last night after he was hospitalized. I'm curious if they did the testing this morning. Dr. Alan Sills, who's the NFL's medical director, said that Tua was tested each and every day last week after that, what they're listing as a non-concussion. There's still some pretty open questions about that. There has been a lot of talk about what's called second impact syndrome. That's really not in play here and really misunderstood. Having two concussions this close, let's say the first concussion that multiple doctors are saying weren't, let's just pretend it was. Be on the safe side. Those aren't second impact syndrome. Second impact syndrome is what happens when you're concussed, go back in the game, and then are hit again. This is a really controversial topic. There have been deaths. It's usually in much younger athletes where the brain isn't fully developed. And again, hopefully we don't have those kind of things. Were that a concussion last week and he came back in the game and was concussed again, even then second impact syndrome isn't a big concern because all the documented cases are in younger, less developed athletes than somebody playing in the NFL.
So just to update everybody, this is not done in the eyes of the league and the players union. There is an ongoing investigation as to whether the concussion protocols were followed properly after the Buffalo game that Will was mentioning, where there may or may not have been an initial concussion before the massive hit on Thursday Night Football.
Yeah.
As if you're not familiar with the concussion protocol processes, each game has an independent neurologist on the field that does not work for the team. They're supposed to work independently of the team. So there isn't any pressure.
Yeah.
There isn't any biases being involved in the evaluation of these head and neck injuries. However,
the team doctor is still in charge. This is something that Dave Chow was actually making pretty clear today. Former team doctor for the Chargers. The head physician is still in charge. The independent consultant, and there's one on each sideline apparently, which I didn't know before today. They are not selected by the team. I don't know who they are, honestly. I'm curious how they're selected. Neurologists don't grow on trees, nor are they cheap. Right. So having two kind of surprised me. And unaffiliated, you're still from the town. I'm curious whether it's the same guy every week. Dr. Chow indicated that there's like a small pool, 2 or 3 that they have. So it's interesting. But remember, the team doctor is still in charge. And that's not necessarily a bad thing or a biased thing. The difference is that doctor is going to know the player. The athletic trainer is going to see him each and every day. The team doctor is going to be around the team enough to know him. If you were concussed and I was evaluating you, I know you enough to know how you react to things. There was the old joke about, they asked a guy who the president was, and the athletic trainer nudges him and goes, he doesn't know and he's not concussed. So it's one of those situations where I think it's good that the physician, the athletic trainer, other people from the team are involved because they do know that player, how that player reacts. Having a familiar face when you've been knocked goofy is a very, very good thing. So those doctors having the final say is good. I do think they need a complete, I'm not going to say a revamp yet. I think they got to take a hard look and say, are we still doing things the best way possible? Can we do this better? And I will give the NFL credit because I've taken my shots at them on this issue and others. They have been good about adjusting the protocol when needed. A couple of years ago, there were a couple they just flat missed, and they instituted the spotter system, where it's usually an athletic trainer in the press box who can buzz down to the officials and say, hey, number 62's got to go. He's got to go get checked right now. They don't care about the game situation. Again, they're not employed by the team. So it's one of those situations where they've been good about making the changes along the way, even in situations where it's going to cost them money. So if there's more changes, if there's things they can do that are better, I think they'll do that.
For sure. And the fact that it's not just the league, but the players union investigating this should give us confidence that whatever happened will come out in the wash here, will be found out. And we're talking about a team that the NFL has shown already that it is not afraid to discipline if it breaks the rules. So if that was the case, then I'm sure they won't hesitate to discipline the Miami Dolphins yet again here. So, but we have to wait and see and see how this double-barreled investigation, if you will, plays out here moving forward.
I'm very curious with Tua himself. Obviously, a guy who's had his injuries along his career, been able to come back from them. Having the 10 days is interesting to me. If he has no symptoms, if he comes back, he's 5 days out from that whole situation against the Bills. Could he conceivably, he was obviously concussed, could he be cleared in time to play next week?
Everybody's different, right? Because you got a guy like Hunter Renfrow who's been out multiple weeks now, but we've seen plenty of guys. T. Higgins came back in a week, no problem.
Yeah, and he took another hit last week and was checked and came back onto the field. That big helmet-to-helmet hit, that was a dirty hit when the guy led with the crown of his helmet. He should have been ejected. But he's had no consequences except for that little mild sprained ankle that he had last night. But yeah, everybody's different. Some guys have no symptoms at all from the biggest hit you've ever seen. Some guys don't have any. One crazy story. There was a study done a couple of years ago where they had impact sensors in the helmets and they were looking at high school kids and they were looking through the tape and they had 4 impacts in short order for 2 different kids. And they were like, what kind of play was this? This must have been a kickoff or something. So they looked, time-stamped it, put it to the film. Turns out these 2 kids were actually kind of scrub players, and they were kind of firing themselves up before the game by headbutting each other. And it was the 4 biggest impacts of the entire game. So I don't know whether they had symptoms, but you can't take the severity from what it looks like.
Right. Totally fair. Totally. Fantastic in-depth analysis on the entire concussion situation in general, as well as the Tua Tagovailoa situation. As always, Will's column is on thelines.com each and every week. It will be available Sunday morning for week 4 to get you ready ahead of kickoff. And if you are enjoying the video, if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Let us know in the comments your thoughts on the concussion situation and also the other injuries that you're keeping an eye on and any bets you might be making this week in the National Football League. For the rest of this show, we're going to run through some of the latest injury news as final injury reports come out on Friday for the Sunday games. We're recording about 3 o'clock in the afternoon East Coast time on Friday. So not all of the West Coast teams have filed their final injury reports, but we'll do the best we can here with what we have. And I think one that is totally significant is the Detroit Lions injury report, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, I believe an ankle, and DeAndre Swift as well. I got to jog my memory here on what the specifics were.
Ankle for Swift.
Ankle, okay.
Yeah, he played through it 1 week, seemed good, didn't have high volume, and they handed off. And Dan Campbell, with the bye coming up, is basically just buying some extra rest for his star running back. With Amon-Ra St. Brown, this is a bit of a surprise. They've ruled him out this early. I thought they would take it up to game time, but it tells you it might be a little bit more severe than it looked at the time. Again, you can't always watch things and figure out where they're going, but having their 2 key guys go down, I'm very curious to see where Jared Goff's going to go, who he's going to hand it to. Obviously, they have Williams there, who's going to get a bigger share of the touches, but he doesn't have that game-breaking those hips and feet that
we're going to have DJ Chark. We're going to have Khalif Raymond maybe in the slot now for the line. It's a big downgrade.
The guy I think is going to be good, but he has a mild foot injury, is TJ Hawkinson. He's been practicing this week. Goff always likes throwing to the tight end, so I think we're going to be over on Hawkinson, under on Goff. I just don't think they're going to be as effective with their two stars down, especially, man, once he found Amon-Ra St. Brown and his brother Equinemius had a pretty good day too. I need to talk to their parents. I want to find out the story. But
his dad's Mr. Universe. His dad was like a Mr. Universe contestant. Amazing.
And what did the guy who beat Arnold Schwarzenegger?
I don't know if he beat him. He may have. I don't know the whole story. I just know that he was a Mr. Universe contestant.
Yeah, I just think once Goff found him, that lit things up. That wasn't a good Lions team. I'm still not completely buying in. I think there's a little bit of Hard Knocks hype still resting on them. But when you're missing two key parts, it's rough. So I'm laying off everybody. I'm worried. On my fantasy team, I have Goff and Brady. And Brady's been killing me, which I don't think anybody's ever said before this year. I actually benched Brady for Goff, and now I'm questioning it this week.
I think you got to switch it back this week with Brady getting his receivers back. Just a little quick fantasy advice. But this has been one-way traffic on this line all week. It was 6. It is down to +3.5 for Seattle. Ironically, the first time the Lions are favored in a game in more than 700 days and 26 games, and everybody's picking the other team to cover, and I think Seattle's live in this game to win outright with the major injuries. I think it was Sharp Clark on Twitter who noted just how stark the split is in yards per play when the ball goes to St. Brown or Swift and when it goes to literally anybody else on the Lions roster. So I think this is a spot where it's going to be very difficult for the Lions to sustain the success they've had on offense. And also their defense is really poor. And Seattle still has weapons with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And they also have, believe it or not, shockingly through 3 weeks, Geno Smith is number 1 in the NFL in completion percentage over expectation. So he's been doing just fine. Yeah,
that one's intriguing to me. And I've got some of my own money on this game. I got a parlay going with a couple of overs and unders. But the big part of that is I also have Seattle to win outright.
There you go. I like it. You have a note here in the show notes for Jones showed up at practice with no brace. Which Jones are we talking about here?
Yeah, this was Mac Jones, and actually he showed up at practice. The guy I thought had no brace was not Mac Jones. Silly me for thinking that the guy who was in focus. Turns out he was back in the back with the quarterbacks, had the red jersey on, but he wasn't moving in the video. He didn't have a brace, but he wasn't moving. So is this some sort of Bill Belichick magic? Again, the Patriots
throw him out there for the media portion, make people think about it, and then he goes back to the medical room.
Exactly. I just don't see any way this is going. I'll admit that video fooled me and I deleted what I was saying about it. But it's one of those instances where we're talking about surgery, and I know that he consulted with the Alabama doctors. Again, Tua Tagovailoa, who we spoke about earlier, has 2 major high ankle sprains that were repaired with Kevlar. It's a procedure called tightrope, and I detailed that in my lines column. He consulted with them. He was like, if I have this surgery, what am I looking at? How long could I come back in season? There is some question about that. So when you're consulting about surgery, you normally you don't come back that week. So I just don't see any way this isn't Brian Hoyer. And the last couple of times we saw Brian Hoyer here in Indianapolis, it did not go well.
So the latest news we have on Friday is Mac Jones reportedly could be a, quote, game time decision for the Patriots on Sunday. But given everything
day.
Day by day. Yes, sir, Mr. Belichick, sir. So given what you just said and that report, is it fair to say if for some unbeknownst reason Mac Jones trots out there for week 1 or for the first snap of the game in week 4 and is going to try and give this a go, you are actually more confident in the Packers facing a hobbled Mac Jones than you would be in a healthy Brian Hoyer, considering the nature of this injury?
Yeah, I just don't see any way he's going to be mobile. I mean, he's not the most mobile quarterback to begin with, but he can run. I mean, I think he's a very, very comparable athlete to Tom Brady. You don't look at him and say, "Ooh, look at the body on that guy," or "Look at the legs," and you're not going to get any measurables.
You must work out.
Yeah, they just win. Jones hasn't had that kind of success, at least in the NFL. But if I don't think anybody can get out there 1 week after what looked like a severe high ankle sprain. Again, we don't know everything, and what it looks like isn't always what it is, but I just cannot imagine the guy playing, let alone playing effectively. So if he goes out there, I'm going to be throwing a lot of money the other way.
Yeah, and if he does, we bet the Packers, because that's crazy. I think it's all gamesmanship, though, from Belichick, just personally. The Cleveland Browns, another guy we are thankful is okay, is Myles Garrett, who was in a pretty severe car accident. Apparently, reportedly, the car flipped multiple times in the air. He's talking about how it's kind of given him a new outlook on life, and thankful. So first of all, great that he's okay. We're not sure he's going to play this week. He is questionable against the Falcons, as is Jadeveon Clowney is questionable. So I'm not sure how much you could tell us about Myles Garrett given the nature of it, but Jadeveon Clowney as well questionable in this one.
Yeah, Clowney's more concerning. With Myles, first, pour one out for that poor Porsche. I mean, that thing was banged up, but did its job. It was supposed to crumple that way to save the occupants, and it certainly did. That he got out with basically, bangs and bruises.
Yeah.
We don't know how serious this biceps injury is. It's on his right side. I'm assuming he was driving, so I don't know what he would have hit, whether he braced himself on the top. But that's the one that's concerning people, is the biceps. Obviously he's got to be able to push. If he can't do that, he can't play effectively. From everything I've heard from Cleveland, it comes down to, how does he feel? If you've ever been in a car wreck, it doesn't feel good. You're all banged up.
Your whole body
hurts
sore.
A little bit everywhere. Your body's sore. Your body inflames and basically doesn't want to move because it's protecting itself. Especially in that kind of general impact, you tend to see people hunched over for a little while because they're protecting their spine. It's just, again, the body's natural reaction. I do believe it's a game time decision. I think he'll want to play. Can they get him there? We just don't know. So that's literal game time decision. Clowney looks a lot less likely to play. And if both of them aren't out there, that really affects my view on the game. And I think that points total looks a lot better.
Both of them complete DNPs each day of practice this week, nevertheless still listed as questionable. So a lot of times you see questionable and you're on the higher end of questionable or less likely end. I would consider both of these guys on the less likely end of that 50-50.
I don't think Clowney's going to play. I really think Garrett's going to be that real game time decision, that he's going to walk into the locker room and we're going to know. Will he go out there and run a little bit, just try to convince himself of it? There's not really a way you can take a painkiller. There's nothing that general. I mean, you can take it on leave, but that doesn't do a whole lot. Anything you take that's general is going to slow you down, and that's the last thing you want playing that kind of position, especially already injured.
The Browns are a small favorite across the board as we record 1 to 1.5 at Atlanta. I talked about on the Megapod how I am interested in Atlanta, teasing them up to 7.5, given how good their offense is. So you can go check that out on the Megapod. Next injury we're going to talk about here is Christian McCaffrey. DNP Wednesday and Thursday, gets in a limited practice on Friday, has a thigh injury. Even Ian Rappaport isn't sure how severe this is. He's quote unquote keeping it close to the vest, is CMC. I'm not sure I matter, considering how just terrible this passing offense has been for Carolina. Baker Mayfield's been dead last in a number of key quarterback metrics through the first 3 weeks. Not sure it's entirely his fault with the scheme and the coaching that he's received. There's been a lot of film review by analysts like Dan Orlovsky showing how they're just telegramming plays like it's JV football in high school. But as for this injury with Christian McCaffrey, it is a thigh injury. So what can you tell us about the context of this for a dual threat running back? Yeah,
the bigger worry for me is not that he won't play. It's that he'll get out there and feel it again and either say, you know what, I'm not going to be able to go, or worse, that he re-injures it, that he exacerbates this injury. Matt Rule has already been, on the hot seat Now this Arizona State job opens up, and there's been a lot of rumors about that. If he loses McCaffrey this week, I don't know what they're going to be able to do, and that might be the end. I'm much more worried about McCaffrey when he play. I do think he's going to play this week, but I'm more worried about the unknown. Does he get out there on the first play? He feels that quad tighten up. It's a quad. It's low on the quad to the point where there was some question about whether there was tendon involvement. Now, there's a lot of different ways that can go, and quad tendons can be redundant. They actually use them to replace ACLs these days. So it's a very complex injury. What I'm worried about is McCaffrey's smart. He understands that he can't go out there and play through injuries. That's how he has gotten this injury-prone tag. So that's my worry rather than him not playing.
Yeah, I hear you. Especially, it's a tough spot for fantasy people, for props guys. If he plays, it might. If he plays, would you agree? It's a pretty decent. I put it this way: if he plays, if he's active, and the props are lined at his normal projections. It seems like potentially an under spot here.
Hard under on all of those. I just don't see a situation where he's going to get a lot of carries, that they're going to really test this. And it's only going to take one play. You know, if he gets pushed back into an awkward position and he pushes on that quad, remember the quad's 4 muscles, but it's only one that's injured. It's at a low point on the knee. I just can't see him getting the kind of targets and touches that he normally gets regardless. That one's a hard under for me. I can see so many people. Somebody's going to say, oh, McCaffrey's active, and go bet that. And it's just like, no, just because he's active doesn't mean he's the same.
Panthers completely fraudulent win last week, losing yards per play. Get some help in defense and special teams to beat New Orleans. Right now, a small 1-point favorite, 1.5 in one spot still. I took Cardinals money line here, just better quarterback at plus money. And if you could still get that teaser leg up to 7.5, I think that's a great look in this game as well. Moving on here to the New Orleans Saints playing in London against the Minnesota Vikings. With this being a game across the pond, we have the luxury of getting injury reports a little bit earlier. So we know Jameis Winston is out. We know Michael Thomas is out. Jarvis Landry and Alvin Kamara are questionable. We've talked a lot about Jameis Winston's back injury, so you can go back to a previous week on the podcast here and get the lowdown here and the full description of what Will has on that. The Michael Thomas one is the one I want to touch on here, even though he's not playing, Will, because it's a foot injury.
Yeah.
But it's not the same foot ankle that he's dealt with in the past. It's the other side. But we've also talked about your concerns about whether he rehabbed, fully optimized, if he has gait issues with the way he walks and whatnot. Is that kind of what you're wondering here, or is it something different?
No, it's the fact that a lot of times you'll injure one side and then get an injury on the other side. So many people think, if you have a right side, in this case it was an ankle issue, then you're going to have a right knee issue. That's usually not the case. I mean, think about it. When you got a rock in your shoe, you don't just walk different with that one foot. You're putting more weight on the other. You're having longer ground foot contact. There's all sorts of gait-related things that go into this. And especially when you're talking about running at full speed, full accelerations, the kind of gyrations and landings that these guys do, it is very common to have a contracided injury in this case. So the foot's problematic to begin with. Foot on turf, more problematic. Plays on turf most of the time in that division, even more problematic. And he hasn't played very much over the last couple of years. Even more problematic. I'm very worried about Michael Thomas. I had a lot of unknowns on him coming into the season. I've been impressed with how he ran before he injured himself, but we weren't doing like a full gait analysis or anything. Getting him back is going to be key. Winston with the back, that's just a pain tolerance issue, and we saw he just didn't play very well last week. You have to think that factored into it. So you've got no Landry, he's out. No Thomas.
You think Landry's going to be out? Either. He's officially questionable.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to play either. There have been a lot of indications this week that he was out. And here's the other factor, and here's something to think about with Dalvin Cook as well. When these teams go to London, it's worse than a road game. These are completely different setups. Even though the NFL has done a lot of things at Hotspur Stadium, they haven't been able to set things up exactly the same way. Look, English athletic trainers or / physiotherapists do things differently. They don't always have the same modalities. There's going to be a certain basic level, and it's a great facility. I mean, it's amazing, actually. But if you've ever cooked in somebody else's kitchen, you don't know where all the knives are. You don't know where they store the plates. You don't know where that salt shaker is. It's worse in an athletic training room. You don't know where everything is. You don't know how everything works. So you don't have all the tools at your disposal. Look, they bring a lot with them. They're going to be able to do a lot. It's not like they're not qualified or resourceful. It's just they're not in the same place. We see a disadvantage when teams are on the road. It's even more so there. I'm very curious to see if we get any sort of indication. We've had enough London games that we know it's a real disadvantage. Now with Munich games this year and more that'll be going around the globe, I'm curious if it'll be consistent or whether it's going to be stadium-based, since Tottenham and Wembley have been basically the only set that the NFL have used.
Alvin Kamara, 15 carries, 61 yards, average at best, 2 receptions on 7 targets for only 12 yards. Lost a fumble last week. Still dealing with the ribs. I'm assuming still a pain tolerance.
It's still a pain tolerance issue. I think he'll play. How effective he is, I think this all comes down to Taysom Hill. How are they going to use Taysom Hill? This is a new offense. It's not Sean Payton running gimmick plays. I'm sure they're looking back on that offense and flipping through the playbook. But what is Taysom Hill, who hasn't been taking a lot of reps until this week at quarterback, going to be able to do? I don't know. I didn't like him when he was prepping to be a quarterback, so we'll have to see what he can do. But without his weapons and being tossed into the fire, I think this is the week that everybody suddenly thinks Kirk Cousins looks good again.
Kind of putting you on the spot here, but same game, Dalvin Cook has a shoulder injury. It's not the first time he's dealt with a shoulder dislocation here. I've read a lot about this as a fantasy football player, and the fact that, if you don't get surgery on it, you are a large percentage more likely to keep suffering this injury. Yep. How much more should we know about this, and how concerned are you that this is not the last time he's going to suffer this injury this year?
It's probably not. There are a couple things going in here. First off, the shoulder joint is like a very shallow cup and a ball. And so when you pull that ball out, it gets injured. There's all sorts of the muscles and tendons and everything that connects to that area, let alone the labrum that kind of cushions in between the cup and the ball. Those things get torn. He's got a severe tear in his labrum that he elected not to get fixed in the off season. So whether it's from a previous injury, whether some people just have a really shallow cup, so they're more likely to have dislocations. Now, the other thing, and this was key to last week, he does not like wearing the harness, which is a harness that protects his shoulder, keeps it from moving quite as much, theoretically would protect it from this kind of severe dislocation. Now, last week, he just had a subluxation, which is where the ball moves just a little bit. It doesn't get all the way out, but it moves more than it's supposed to, and that's where that soft tissue damage is. I'm guessing he's going to start wearing that, like it or not, which should help things. If you're a baseball fan, this is completely the same thing that Fernando Tatis Jr. dealt with, where it would pop out, they would pop it back in, the soft tissue. They could deal with it. It was painful, but he was going to get it fixed down the line. I'm convinced that Cook's going to have to get this fixed down the line. I'm also curious, just because his brother also plays in the league, is this a genetic issue? Brothers in sports absolutely fascinate me. How are some Jose Canseco and some are Ozzie Canseco? When you see genetic conditions, we knew Cooper Manning had a neck issue well before Peyton ever did, and they weren't the same. But maybe there's a genetic proclivity. At the combine, they do take genetic tests. They don't use them yet, but it's a fairly interesting thing that the NFL is doing there. With Cook, I don't think he's going to be as effective, just because I can't see how he's going to be as involved both in blocking, since that shoulder is still painful, and I think with the harness on, that makes him less effective in the passing game as well. He's never been too involved. So I think we're going to see a lot more of Alex Madison.
Cook did have back-to-back full participant practices, but obviously it doesn't take much to do that when you're just having a shoulder put back into socket. All the concerns we still have that Will just mentioned are there. And what I heard listening to you was be very, very careful betting on overs or anytime touchdowns with Dalvin Cook at this point. Fair to say?
Yeah, fair to say. Plus, again, London games are weird. I think I read they tend to go under. Don't lock that down unless you test that. But it's definitely a change for teams, especially medical staffs.
Fair enough. Now let's talk Sunday Night Football here. Before we get to the Bills injury report against the Ravens, the two kind of big headline games for week number 4, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are getting healthier. Julio Jones, back-to-back limited participants with that PCL injury in his knee. Chris Godwin went from limited on Wednesday to DNP on Thursday. Although the report says it was not because of a setback, it was a rest day for him. But still trying to come back from that hamstring injury. Obviously, Mike Evans will be back off suspension. Russell Gage played last week, back-to-back limited participant with a hamstring injury of his own. What's your outlook for this receiving core for the Bucs? Because it seems the betting market is bullish that they're going to get maybe at least one of these guys back in addition to Evans.
Yeah, this is going to be the question. With Julio Jones, I know it is going to be a literal game time decision. They're going to run him out there. They're going to see how the knee does. They're going to see how he's adjusted to the brace he's wearing. That does take some adjustment just to get comfortable with it. It's a fairly minimal brace, so I think he'll be okay, but I don't know. And again, game time decision. Same thing with Chris Godwin. They're going to run him out there before the game. They've got to make that set before 90 minutes, but I think we're going to know earlier than that. Should be widely reported whether he's able to go, whether he's able to do the whole route tree. I think Gage of all of them is the more likely. He had that hamstring, but it didn't appear to bother him a lot. He was seen sprinting and cutting in practice, which is normally what you want to see. Sometimes guys get at practice and they're not really doing anything. They're basically just running straight forward. It's those hard cuts, and especially the starts that really test the hamstring. So I feel better about him. This is a tough one because, at least you got 90 minutes to figure it out and make your bets accordingly. Because I do think this swings everything. I mean, it's a tough matchup. It's going to be a very angry Kansas City team after their tough loss last week to Indianapolis. It'll be interesting to see exactly how it goes because Tom Brady hasn't been Tom Brady this year. Should he have just stayed retired? It's certainly been a mess down there, and the injuries aren't helping things.
For sure. I mean, they weren't extremely impressive week 1 when they were healthy. They only scored 19 points against Dallas. You really can't give a clear judgment on them from the past 2 weeks with the receiver injuries. The opener on this game was Bucks minus 2.5 in the summer. It got as high as Bucks plus 3 earlier this week with the receiver concerns, but with the growing optimism that somebody else will be rejoining Mike Evans in this core, we've now flipped it back to Bucks minus 1 in some spots. So I think a lot of disagreement in the market on this. I think it's moving based on injury news with the Bucks wide receiving core, and frankly, just one I'm just going to sit back and watch and enjoy. But I do think that the move back towards a pick'em, towards a Bucks small favorite, makes sense based on if the receivers are playing. It makes sense because of the fact that you just can't give a good diagnosis or evaluation of what the Bucks were the past 2 weeks with the injuries that they had.
Exactly, That's where I'm at. We don't know whether these guys are going to play. Let me tell you one thing that's not going to be a factor. I talked to somebody on the ground there, almost literally, talking about the turf. Obviously Ian came through, and our thoughts and prayers to those people that have been devastated down in Collier and Lee County. Just terrible stuff, and now hitting South Carolina as we speak. So it's one of those situations where a lot of people are going to think the weather is problematic. Evidently, Tampa turf is almost completely drained. A lot of people were saying that Godwin and Gage especially weren't going to run on soft, soaked turf. These stadiums have incredible drainage. I mean, Hurricanes might be a little bit different, but they basically got a hard rain up there in Tampa. So the field is not going to be an issue at all in terms of these guys running. I'm told it's pretty standard. It's not completely dry yet after a big rain, but I don't think that's going to factor in at all.
Final injury report we want to look at here is the Buffalo Bills. Big game in the AFC against the Baltimore Ravens. As we record this, I believe the Ravens are, still 3-point home underdogs against Buffalo. Interesting line movement here on that key number of 3. This one reopened, Bills -3. A little bit of early week money moved it to 3.5. But as we know, earlier in the week, the limits are lower. And then when the limits went up, big pushback on that plus 3.5, and Ravens money came back in with the higher limits. And now we are back to where we started at 3 across the board on both sides here, -110. The Bills have injury concerns, though, here, because let's start with Gabe Davis, the number 2 wide receiver, had an ankle injury. The head coach, Sean McDermott, admitted that he aggravated it, but he's going to play. He went from limited to DNP on Thursday and then limited again Friday. I don't know how effective he can be on this, though.
Yeah, talked to a coach who was taking a look at the video on that, and he said they were routing him around that ankle. Even before the exacerbation, you can't plan for everything. Even if you're trying to keep a guy from cutting one direction to keep that ankle off, it's going to happen. The scramble plays, especially with Josh Allen. So I think Davis is going to be much the same as he was last week. Worry about that ankle going forward. Do we have to do this every week because they can't get him healthy? Their bye is fairly early, so I think that's going to be one, if I recall correctly. And it's a situation where the offensive line has a bunch of injuries as well. So here's the question that I always wonder is, does a mobile quarterback, and we've got 2 of the most mobile quarterbacks in the league going head to head, do mobile quarterbacks, can they adjust? The fact that they move, do they not need blockers as much? And that's actually not true. It turns out, everybody thinks mobile quarterbacks are more likely to get hit, but as my co-author on The Science of Football, quick plug, found, mobile quarterbacks actually get hurt less. They're not taking more hits. They're used to it. I think Josh Allen will be able to adjust. I think he's a good quarterback. I think the offense will be more short throws rather than deep throws. So I don't think you're going to get one of those huge big plays. You probably still will because you get them on scrambles. But I think they'll be able to use his mobility to make up for the deficits they have, at least this week. It's interesting to me to see how this line has moved just a little bit. An angry Lamar Jackson playing for a contract has been maybe the best player in the NFL.
I think he should already be the MVP favorite, considering he's already won the award. But you could start, that was a bet. I have Jalen Hurts 55-1 to win MVP from the summer, and I'm adding Lamar Jackson 7-1 this week before the games start, because I thought one book having him as the 4th choice is ludicrous right now.
Yeah, it's been, the way he's played, whether or not playing for a contract is a real thing, I think he does feel slighted. And we know that us against the world kind of thing works for teams. So I'm not clear on this line. On the one hand, I don't think it's going to affect Allen as much as people think. The Davis injury does, but he has other weapons. Let me phrase the question this way to you, Will. Typically, home field's worth 1.5, 2 points in the NFL now is the general consensus. Yeah.
Are the Baltimore Ravens 4.5 or 5 points worse than the Buffalo Bills with these injuries?
I don't think so. I
hard to make that argument that the Bills are.
It's tough. It depends. Again, I think it depends entirely on the line play. And can they scheme it up in a week? Is mobility enough to get around a bad line? And we've seen that in the past. We saw that with Pat Mahomes. When he had missing guys on the lines, he could play around it. When Fisher was hurt at the end of a couple seasons ago, when he was hurt with his high ankle sprain, going back to Mac Jones, in the playoffs, he was awful because he was completely off his game. So For me, I don't think it'll affect Allen as much.
Fair enough. We haven't even touched on the secondary injuries for the Buffalo Bills. Some guys banged up on defense. Ed Oliver, the D tackle, limited all week. He's officially questionable. Jordan Phillips was DNP all week. He is out. Another D tackle with a hamstring injury. Jordan Poyer, limited all week. He is questionable. Might get him back. Christian Benford, one of their backup corners, he is out. DNP all week with a hand injury. Another cornerback, Dane Jackson, limited all week, questionable. Cam Lewis, another cornerback. So this is chunk injuries in the secondary for the Buffalo Bills, and we will see whether or not the pass rush can cover that up against Lamar Jackson and company.
Two things there. You call it chunk. I always call them stack. When you're going 2, 3, 4 guys down the depth chart, there's always people that say next man up. I say, there's a reason there's a depth chart. This guy was, for whatever reason, 3rd and 4th. If he's having to play, there is a talent difference. It doesn't matter. The other thing is something I call the death spiral. Even for NFL teams, there are usually a handful of athletic trainers. They'll have some assistant, massage therapist, physical therapists that are in there. Strength and conditioning coaches get involved sometimes. But there's only so many hours in the day. Those guys are already working 18 to 20-hour days to begin with. Plus, they have to travel. Plus, they have to do all the other duties they have, plus paperwork. It's a mess. When you get that many people on the injured list, that's that many people you're having to maintain, that you're having to tape up, that you're having to do therapy on each and every day. You run out of time, which means what's going to get lost? You're going to lose prevention. You're not going to be able to do as much work with the guys who are healthy, and they're going to get banged up along the season. At some point, you just can't keep up, and you lose it. It looks like a death spiral. So I worry about Buffalo. That's a physical team. They've got a tough schedule. And they're really, really banged up this early. I don't know how they're going to get it back on track, and that's something that can really sap a team down the line. And if they don't fix that, I usually the line figures that out, but it often figures it out late. So there could be a couple weeks in there where there's some real arbitrage opportunities.
On the other side, Ronnie Staley is questionable this week for the Baltimore Ravens, one of their tackles. So that's another one to keep an eye on in this game. With
the Ravens, Dobbins looked really good to me. There's been a lot of controversy about his knee injury. He was saying it was significantly more. It was the ACL and the MCL. That's pretty common. So I thought he ran really, really well. It looked natural to me. It looked flowing. He wasn't going away from power moves. He twisted once. He looked fairly confident in it. So I think we might be underestimating him a little bit. Haven't seen where they set the yardage line on him, but that's one I stay away from just because I can't figure out who they're going to hand the ball to all the time.
Yeah, I mean, Justice Hill got 6 carries for 60 yards last week, and John Harbaugh's praising him, saying he ran like a star running back. So I think it's still by committee there at the moment. And let's be honest, their number 1 running back is Lamar Jackson. So don't think that J.K. Dobbins over under 35.5 rushing yards is a stone cold lock here with the nature of their offense. That is for sure. As you could hear, it is blatantly obvious. Will gives fantastic injury insight and analysis on a weekly basis. He is the author of the new book, The Science of Football. Go ahead and hold that baby up. Hey, what's in there, man? What will people find if they pick that book up?
Basically, we took a look at pretty much everything, whether it's injuries, you would expect that. The development of offenses, how are teams training and developing players, schemes, how do they design those, how do teams travel. There's a ton of stuff. I'm really proud of the work, and you can get it wherever you buy your books.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, everybody. You can find Will's injury column Sunday morning on thelines.com ahead of kickoffs. And best of luck navigating the ever-growing injury list around the National Football League here in week number 4.